Welcome. We appreciate everyone coming today. We are providing this public forum for you to provide public comment on the draft rules for solar energy development on high value agricultural land. This, we will not be able to take questions per se that we can answer, but if you ask a question, we'll respond to it in a response to comments document at the end of the comment period. Michelle, did you want to go over the?
We want to jump to the next slide. Morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Webb, Division Director for Agriculture Resource Development. And has everybody signed in?
That wants to speak. If you're just listening in, you don't have to sign in.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder. And everybody online, if you can sign in just by adding your name to the chat, if you would like to give public comment this morning. You don't have to turn your camera on if you're online. Also, if you want to give public comment, you're welcome to sit at your seat and do that. Your audio will be recorded. We're recording this meeting. If you would like to speak and be on camera while you're giving a public comment, you're welcome to use the podium, whatever is more comfortable for you. If you're online, those that are online, please keep your microphone muted until we call on you to give your public comments. And you don't have to turn your camera on. That's totally up to you. Again, as Caitlin said, we're accepting the public comment today, but we're not responding to that today. It's just your opportunity to give your comments. That will be recorded. There'll be a document that's sent out afterwards with responses. Time limit for giving public comment today is 3 minutes. You're absolutely welcome to give written comment as well. And you can send those by email to AGE or agenergy@maine.gov. That's up on the screen, or you can mail us written comment as well.
And if you have a printed statement, we can also take that.
Yep, you can leave that here today as well. And if we don't get through all of the public comments by 10, we're going to take a 10-minute bio break at 10 a.m. this morning.
And then it seems like so far we have more public commenters in the room than we do online. So I think we can take the public commenters in the room than online.
Okay, so we'll start with public comments in.
And just so you all know, the public comment that you give here today versus one that is written holds the same weight. I encourage you to email us or send us your comments. I will type them as accurately as I can today, but you're also welcome to email us as well. We do read all those. We initially had a public comment period, or we sought comments after the statute passed last spring. You can actually go to the next slide. So the statutory authority that these rules are based on, it's a long title, an act regarding compensation fees and related conservation efforts to protect soils and wildlife, fisheries habitat from solar and wind energy development, and high impact electric transmission lines under the site location of development laws. The public law directs us to define high value agricultural land, dual use agriculture and solar production, establish tiers of high value agricultural land with variable compensation amounts for each tier, and implement a permitting program for solar energy development on high value agricultural land. So this statute passed last spring, and our rules are fulfilling those requirements. Please keep in mind that this statute was done in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Protection. And so they are also going through rulemaking for their part of the statute that they need to fulfill. There are some rules that directly apply to agriculture that DEP is working on. So if you're interested, please partake in their rulemaking process as well. So I can read this to you, but our definition of high value agricultural land is also in your hard copies if you'd like to follow along. Land that, as verified by a field-based survey conducted by a Maine licensed soil scientist, that has physical properties that indicate high suitability for agriculture, as indicated by one or more contiguous acres of the land area is comprised of prime farmland of statewide importance, or a combination of the two, or one or more contiguous acres of the land area is designated as locally valuable farmland. Locally valuable farmland is a new term we've coined. That definition will be in the rules as well. It can't be occupied by residential, commercial, or industrial uses that would reduce its agricultural potential. It can't have any structures except for farm-related structures and energy generation and transmission structures that accommodate co-located agricultural activities. Land that is considered PFAS impacted HVAL, there's a definition for that as well. It is essentially land that would be considered HVAL were it not for the presence of PFAS. And the definition of HVAL does not include land that meets the definition of contaminated land, another definition. I didn't want to put every definition in here because we'd be here all day and I want to have time for all of you to be able to speak. So we will also provide copies if you need it. Next slide. So the definition for dual use agricultural and solar production is the co-location of agricultural activities with the solar energy development, the combination of which are located wholly or partially on farmland, result in the production of agricultural products to retain the land's agricultural productivity, both short and long term, and are conducted according to a management plan, which is updated annually, that ensures the continued agricultural productivity of the land in dual use as described in section 5. To be considered dual use, agricultural activities must occur between, or around solar panels within the fenced-in area of a solar energy development. Just so you know, I think agricultural activities has a definition. Agricultural products has a definition, farmland has a definition. So each of these words does have a specific meaning. We do have a lot of definitions in these rules because we were trying to make it as clear as possible and just make sure that there's no ambiguity in what we mean. Next slide. So as far as the compensation tiers, we have 4 tiers based on soil type, conversion pressure, active farming history, and dual use. You basically would choose 1 point value per category, sum that total and divide by 10, and that score will determine your compensation tier. Our reason for doing this is we have farmland of statewide importance, and locally valuable farmland in the soil designation. We put counties that have a large amount of impervious surface conversion as counties that are facing conversion pressure. Active farming history, whether or not it's defined as farmland. And then dual use, we split into 3 categories of crop production, livestock grazing, and pollinator habitat. And depending on how much of the property or the project area that you're doing dual use on, it would be a different point value. So then those point values go into your score, and that gives you the compensation ratio. So if you had a compensation ratio of 5 to 1, that means for every 1 acre of HVAL that is impacted, you would owe 5 times that value of land. So there would be a higher cost for the highest value land of what we deem to be the most important. So DEP is calculating the actual price of the land and calculate the fee that will be paid. So we're kind of splitting those tasks. We just are determining the compensation ratio. Tier 0, where no compensation fee is required, is for PFAS impacted HVAL, or if they do dual use activities in the form of crop production or livestock grazing at 75% or more of the project area. So as I said, there's no dollar figure right now for the compensation tiers because that's DEP will calculate that. And then the DACF compensation fund that this money will go to will be managed by the commissioner for farmland conservation and solar mitigation projects. There is also a conservation easement option where if the applicant wants to conserve a parcel of land instead of paying into a fund, that is something DEP will be handling in conjunction with us, so we'll be working together a lot on this. And then, so the compensation project, if that is the option chosen, it has to have similar soils and be in a similar area to the impacted area. The idea being if this is a highly impacted area with high value soils, we want to make sure that that community, their high value agricultural land is getting protected. Next slide. All of this is posted on our website. It has the draft rules, the statute, the memo from our department, and the cover sheet on the form. So we can leave that up there. I'm not sure if the next slide has it as well. Yeah, so we can leave the AG Energy up there. That's where you would email us if you have any questions or public comment. As we said, we can't directly respond to your comments today, but we will respond to your comments in a response to comments document at the end of the comment period. Does anyone have any questions on the process of the public hearing?
I do.
Yeah.
So we're commenting on the proposed rules.
Yes, the rules, not the statute, because the statute is already passed. However, I can't stop you from speaking on whatever you want
The
to.
rules are created by,
By DACF, the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. Okay. So for right now, I'm just going to take people in order that they signed up. So I think first up, we have Dale Cole. You're welcome to sit or go to the podium, wherever you feel comfortable.
And Caitlin, I think we've had a couple people come in, so if you
Yeah, does
joined
anyone else
us and
sign up?
wish to make a comment, please add your name to the sign up list. If you've come in and just want to listen, welcome, and you don't need to sign up.
There may have been some confusion about that.
Yep. And so if we call your name and you don't want to give public comment, just say, you know, I'm good, thank you. Pass, whatever comes to mind.
yes, I'll do it from my chair. I guess my only public comment is, I mean, you hear that, you're gonna develop the value. You're gonna come up with a price. That's the way I understand it. And you want it to be agricultural. There's gonna be a conservation fund to redistribute the funds. I mean, I'm now an ex-dairy farmer and a landowner. And the only person I didn't hear mentioned in there was the landowner or the farmer. Problem with farmland is that we need markets. We need to be paid properly. And we need access to market. None of those exist in a perfect world, so it almost, and I don't want to be too rough about it, but I mean, we need agricultural land, but it almost looks like you're taxing the landowner to go forward. So my comment is we don't need the farmland valued. We need it so that the farm can put it where it wants. Some of these solar projects might help keep the rest of the farmland there. I see that quite a lot. And because we need more input. I mean, talking about a fee that we don't know what it is or what it's going to accomplish, it doesn't sound like it's going back to the farm. So, as far as I know, the farms still own the farms and we'd like to keep them that way. Producing energy, whether it's food or energy, is in the same line, I think. I don't think this exists for households, does it?
No. I'm trying to understand how much I can respond to. This is only for solar on high value ag land.
So if you want to build a house on high value farmland, that's a condominium or subdivision, that's not it. So I guess I'll stop at that. It seems like there's enough room here to.
Thank you. Let me finish typing. Okay, Tyler Holmquist.
Thank you all. I'm here representing Glenvale Solar. Grew up in Maine, still live in Maine. And we appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback on those tools. Glenvale develops utility scale solar projects in Maine, with projects in Buxton, Baldwin, Turner, Topsom, and Warren. These projects will power nearly 40,000 homes, create 200 construction jobs, and provide $60 million in state spending. Each project has a power purchase agreement with Central Maine Power that will generate ratepayer savings that are below 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And our first projects are scheduled to begin construction this year. And we do commend the department for exempting these projects that are further along in development. But I do want to take the Warren project as an example for what impact that these fees would have on projects in the future. On conducting some area takeoffs, the area of the site that would qualify as farmland of statewide importance amounts to about 171 acres, and the amount of prime farmland on the site is roughly 8 acres. And considering a scenario, sort of the worst case scenario, just where we fell in the categories, and then not being able to provide any dual use agriculture on a 600-700 acre plus site, the result of that, the fee would be around $3.2 million for this project. And the result of the fee of this significance is to make the project viable and to kind of meet the other financial milestones that we're looking to make the project go forward. We'd likely have to seek higher PPA rates, which would be passed down to energy consumers in the state. I'd like to also say that, we make our siting decisions in the context of wildlife habitats, wetlands, and proximity to transmission lines, alternative land uses, view shed, and many other factors. This project is sited out of sight of nearby roadways and homes, and has historically been used for aggregate extraction. Just given the nature of the site, there are some areas where sloping could foster farming. In other areas, it's so steep that it would be difficult to do a lot of the uses that are being talked about in these rules, specifically crop production, which is the best way to mitigate via the chart. So on behalf of Glenvale, we appreciate your efforts on this important matter and for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Ann Smith.
Morning. I'm Julianne Smith. I represent the Maine Farmers Coalition. We are a collective of progressive farmers deeply committed to ensuring the sustainable growth and protection of Maine's farming industry. And we will be submitting written comments with specificity to the language and concerns there. But like my friend, Mr. Cole, our farmers are really concerned about the lack of involvement of the farmers and the landowners in this process. Soil is certainly a very important part of agriculture. It's an important part of farming, but it's only one part. So in developing these rules, when you're exclusively looking at soil, we have concerns about that. We have concerns about if you are testing area A for soil, but the farmer knows that area B, which is contained within that same acreage of the proposed solar siting, is wet all the time. It doesn't produce anything, but it's all encompassed in that area. That's not being considered. We're looking at just soil sampling. So we feel that there is a much broader perspective that needs to be included when you are considering what prime agricultural land looks like. It is much more complex than just the soil itself. There are a lot of factors that go into it. There's also market factors. What may be a great crop for 10 years could simply no longer have a market. And so, especially when considering the dual use and then the ability to go back and for someone to say basically, all right, you have this exemption because this is a dual use solar site. Something happens. Let's say that there were sheep grazing under there and the sheep had a disastrous interaction, were all sick and had to be culled. Well, now are you going to go back and charge the solar site fees because of that? How are these things going to be determined? I think the key component to agriculture is being flexible. And we have seen the loss of 7% of our farms in the state of Maine in the last 5 years alone, and most of that is due to a lack of profitability. So there also needs to be a consideration for if this solar project is going to save this farm versus it becoming housing, that should be included with those calculations. You know, what sort of impact is the solar project going to have on preserving the farm as a whole? So I think there is a lot more to be considered in the determination of any fees that are implemented, any decisions that are made. And one of the key components is making sure that farmers can talk about how the land is used and what the characteristics of that land is.
Eliza Donahue?
How's it going? Hi, everyone. My name is Eliza Donahue. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Renewable Energy Association. We're a not-for-profit trade association of renewable energy companies, including solar companies that develop, own, and operate solar at all scales. I'm really happy for the opportunity today to share our comments on the draft rules and for the department's responsiveness to some of our early input in the fall. Thank you very much for that. You know, specifically the inclusion of compensation tiers is really helpful. That makes the rules responsive to kind of what's on the ground instead of taking a blanket approach, and demonstrates fairly plainly how various mitigation strategies can reduce compensation expectations. The option for PBR is also a permit by rule is also helpful. And as Mr. Holmquist said before, exempting projects that are also already deep in development is really helpful. However, like as you've heard from folks before me, you know, we continue to have some significant concerns about the rules and that they will unduly inhibit solar development in Maine. You know, solar that's necessary for Maine to meet its climate and clean energy goals. And also, as Ms. Smith said before me, inhibit the ability of landowners to locate solar on their property and for that solar production to provide a new revenue stream that potentially could help keep the rest of that parcel in production. So we'll offer some very detailed written comments, but today I'm just going to go over some of our top concerns. And our top one being that the definition of high value ag land remains both broad and vague. There's a couple different elements that causes me to use the terms broad and vague. One of them is the inclusion of locally valuable farmland and the definition of high value ag land. You know, that term lives within the definition of high value ag land and then is also separately defined. But that definition has yet to be described or quantified. And while we fully expect the department, you know, intends for that definition to be narrow, we can't know that for sure until that can't know for sure whether that rule, kind of generally speaking, strikes a reasonable balance. And so we're really looking for that in combination with the guidance for licensed soil scientists to conduct locally valuable farmland determinations via a field-based survey for that to be developed for us to truly understand the impact of the rules. Similarly, the definitions of prime soils and soils of statewide significance, you know, it's our understanding based on conversations with soil scientists that that definition continues to not really be black and white. So it's hard, you know, from a predictability standpoint and an even application of the rules for us to get a really clear, much more clear idea of what is going to kind of qualify for, under those definitions, before we can kind of more fully understand again the impact. And then same goes to for PFAS impacted high value agricultural land. That definition relies on a yet to be established policy, which means that an important aspect of this rule is not yet actionable. And again, it's important to our understanding of the scope of those rules, but is also very important to landowners who are really looking to policies related to PFAS contamination to know whether solar is a viable opportunity on their farmland. As I said, we strongly urge the department to narrow and specify those definitions and to develop with an additional opportunity for public comment prior to rule adoption, those specific standards for field surveys. I think others have said very plainly already, we urge the department to account for projects that are located on a portion of farmland. I'll get into that, I think, a little bit more in our written comments, but others have shared that with me before. That's a very common story amongst MREA members, that they are working collaboratively with landowners to create a new revenue stream and a revenue stream that allows the rest of that parcel of land to remain in active production. I did say that the permit by rule option is a good one, and we're grateful for that. That said, the fact that a PBR for projects less than 20 acres and for projects on PFAS contaminated land require a alternatives analysis and also a field survey. That's not typical of a PBR. That is a higher level of burden. Again, that's typical from a PBR process, and something that we would like to see relaxed so that there is, this opportunity for making some modifications so that there is a path towards development of some projects that is less cumbersome. And so finally, kind of with all that in mind, our primary ask is for the department to pause this rulemaking and to allow for additional public comment. And not because this is not a fantastic opportunity and there hasn't been opportunity prior to that, but there are yet to be written portions of the rule. There are several policies and best practices documents that are referenced in the rule that have yet to be written that again are really elemental to our understanding of the impact of the rule. And I do think, we are going to be getting more information soon too on understanding the impact solar has had to date on high value ag land. We all know that there isn't good data right now. And I'm hopeful that knowing that there are some kind of projects in the works that there will be an opportunity for us to gather some of that data and then calibrate rules based on the actual need on the ground. And then as was referenced at the top of the hearing too, we know that these are happening at the same time as the DEP rules, and there is a lot of synergy there, but there is also a real risk that if that synergy does not continue, then you risk putting development pressure on areas where there is, for instance, less of a compensation ratio. And I know that the DEP rules are, continuing to be in development. There have been changes to those compensation ratios, and it would be too bad to find us because of kind of the order of operations from rulemaking to find ourselves in a situation of unintended consequences because having a high compensation ratio for one particular land area means that there's an incentive to locate projects in areas with less of a compensation requirement, which again, puts some undue development pressure. So that was a lot more in our written comments, but thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad that there are a lot of people here to be part of the conversation.
Next, we have Rodney Kelshaw.
Good
morning. I'm Rodney Kelshaw. I'm here this morning representing the Maine Association of Professional Soil Scientists, or MAPS. First, I'd like to say thank you for DACF for having the opportunity to come and speak today. We will be providing public comments in written form, so I'm not going to, go into a lot of deep detail today, but I just wanted to hit on a few topics. One is that since the legislation passed saying that we needed to quantify the amount of HVAL on property, we'd like to point out that it makes sense to not use the NRCS mapping, the scale at which that mapping is developed. It's not appropriate for this scale of what we're trying to do. So an on-site assessment of what type of soil is actually there and where it is makes sense. There could be more HVAL. There might be properties where it's mapped as prime farmland, but when you go out there, it's too stony or something, and maybe none of it will come out as HVAL. So it's important to get that on the ground survey. That being said, and we're excited to see that it says that it should be done by soil scientists, because in Maine, there's a regulation that you can't practice pedology unless you're a licensed soil scientist. So saying that soil scientists would be doing the work goes in line with the existing state rules. But that being said, I think there are parts of the on-site assessment that wouldn't necessarily need to be done by a soil scientist. Probably could be done by the applicant or somebody else. So the parts where it says, if it's covered by industrial land or blueberry land or something like that, I think somebody can go out and tell you if, okay, there's 20 acres of blueberry land. It's been in production for 100 years. You don't need a soil scientist to tell you that. So anyone can figure that out. The same with contaminated land or PFAS. Currently there's a lot of engineers and other people that are doing work with PFAS that aren't soil scientists. They should be able to keep doing what they're doing. So I think maybe going back through and just ironing out that the soils-based part is what the soil scientists should be doing, and then let other folks that are qualified deal with the other parts of it. And that can possibly streamline the process a little bit. The other part that was brought up was the locally valuable. I know it says in the rule that there's going to be a list. Let's make sure that's really well codified, like definitions where these things are located. Because as somebody that's going to be out there making these assessments, if that's not defined really well, you could have two soil scientists go out and come up with different answers because you're using professional judgment on what did they mean when they wrote this rule or when somebody mapped this. So just making sure that that's well codified so that we can get predictable results from the mapping is going to be important. And lastly, the association is going to be working with DACF and the state soil scientist to develop what I've just started calling the HVAL assessment protocol. Not necessarily calling it mapping, because there's the potential that somebody could go out to do an assessment at a site and tell that it's too stony or there's too much slope or something, so that you don't have to create a map to get the answers that something maybe doesn't fall into this category. So we're going to try to keep it predictable and reproducible for the people going out to do the mapping, but at the same time not make it so arduous that the applicant or whoever's paying the bill is getting information that they don't need to make that determination. And then in that, we'll also have it specified how one will go about, if it gets to the point where you do need to do a map, the scale of the mapping that will be done so that the results will be, again, reproducible and predictable for no matter, hopefully, who you hire to do the work, you'll get something that makes sense. And when the DACF gets it, everything looks the same. So it's predictable. So those are our goals. And thanks again for letting us come today.
Chris Spires.
That's me. Morning. My name is Chris Byers. I own Branch Renewable Energy based here in Maine in North Yarmouth. I've been working pretty exclusively on solar projects in the last 5 years, only in Maine. But I'm worried that we're going to start to see that disappear with this type of rulemaking. We've already seen a total collapse of the solar industry and opportunities in our state. Many different players came into the state to develop projects, and for a variety of reasons that are totally unrelated to this rulemaking, they're gone. And we have many projects that could have happened that just can't happen anymore. And I'm afraid that this is going to result in a not only a loss of solar opportunity, but ultimately it's going to result in a loss of opportunity for Maine ratepayers to save money. So if we're looking at projects that are over 20 acres, that are potentially not going to happen because of this rulemaking, it's just too expensive. I hear people on the Energy and Utilities Committee all the time saying, we want cheap power, build these big projects so that we can get economies of scale. Well, this rulemaking targets specifically these projects that can achieve that economies of scale. And I'm concerned about the purpose of the rulemaking. I heard farmers and I heard representatives of the farming community talking about how these projects can offer a lifeline. I was sitting in a town meeting with a landowner in Brooks, pleading with her town to allow her to do this so that she could save the farm. She has a second job. She's just trying to hay the fields on the weekends. She's just trying to keep the farmland in the family, but she can't even pay the taxes. So this is her lifeline to doing this. So, I think there's this perception that solar projects are the reason that we're seeing a loss of farmland, but it's not. I'm probably going to misquote some stats here, but I'm trying to remember this woman, the farmer who was telling me this, but she said, milk pricing hasn't changed much since the 80s, but cost of doing business has gone up 3x. You do the math. I mean, we're facing inflation costs. It's just a disaster for everybody, and especially for farmers with such tight profit margins. I think it's also strange that we're being penalized, not just for putting projects that are on existing agricultural use, but we're being penalized for projects that are put on forested land that's classified as NRCS or classified as farmland by NRCS. And as Rod was saying, it's just a poor way of mapping. Even NRCS will tell you, please don't use our data for regulatory purposes. It's just for a 10,000 foot view of what the soil might or might not be. But what I'm hearing in these rules is that, you could harvest all those trees, no problem, under a timber harvesting permit. You could put a massive 200 home subdivision on that land, no problem. It's just strange that there's such targeted rulemaking towards solar projects with this. Again, that will result in impact to further loss of farmland. I believe that these projects offer the ability for these farms to stay under ownership by their original owners, alternate revenue streams, all that stuff. It just seems strange that we've got such a cherry picking of solar on the solar industry. I do a lot of permitting work, so I started to think, what will happen here when? Yep.
We're at the 4-minute mark.
Okay,
You
all right.
can
I'll
keep
wrap
going,
it
but
up.
just, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to talk about impact here, and I think that what we're trying to do is avoid impact. I think I've made my case as to why I don't think it's really impact. I think it's actually opportunity for solar to be there. But you are regulating farmland on a far greater scale than natural resources, like wetlands of special significance. So as a developer, you will start to see solar developers potentially seek to fill wetlands as a cheaper alternative than to putting a solar project on farmland. The compensation ratio is far less for a developer to do that than to put a project on farmland, which just doesn't make any sense to me. So I feel like we're going to see more impact in places that we don't want to, because we're valuing this farmland so greatly with the compensation ratios that have been proposed. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to have to cut anybody off, but I just want to make sure we have time for everyone. Jake Springer.
It's over here. Thank you. Jake Springer, company Nexamp. We're a developer, owner, and operator of small scale solar projects across the state. About 160 megawatts or so across 28 projects, and we serve over 15,000 customers across the state. I heard a lot of great comments already today, so I'll try to be brief. I want to thank the department for the opportunity to provide this public comment, and we will have written comments as well. Like others, I think we're pretty concerned about the expansiveness of the draft regulations and the practical effect it will have on solar development in the state. I think the reliance on the mapping, as you've heard, and potentially on the soils as well, is going to be impractical, and that there may be a misalignment here between the overall state clean energy goals, the goals to actually protect working lands, and the practical effect of these draft regulations. In terms of the high value ag land definition, I think, from a basic perspective, I think, having lands that have either never been in production or are not in current production be considered high value agricultural land is a little misleading. As you've heard, I think soil quality is one important leg of the stool, if you will. But the other legs are having a farmer to actually work the land and the economics to support it. And I think an over reliance on soils is not necessarily going to deliver, the practical benefits that I think the rulemaking is intended to. There's an estimate that from the department that this will cover about 13%, I think, of state land. But in practice, I think that's understating the impact of where solar development actually is possible and will go. Just doing a quick analysis of our projects, our existing projects, about 60% of those would have triggered at least some amount of high value ag land review. And that's not including obviously the locally valuable farmland, which again, as we've heard, is not fully fleshed out at this point. So while that overall percentage number might seem small, I think the practical effect is that more and more projects than that would indicate are going to be implicated. Just to close, I was born and raised here, and I care deeply about Maine's working lands, protecting those, as well as, the clean energy future for the state. I think it's really important to strike the right balance here. Fortunately, I don't think the draft rules strike that balance, but we'll provide written comments and look forward to working with the department going forward. Thanks.
All right. Shelley, I'm here. Thank you.
Save you from a mispronunciation, yeah. So I'm Shelley McGuire, I work for Maine Farmland Trust. I'm glad to be here to have the opportunity to provide input on these draft rules. For those that aren't familiar, Maine Farmland Trust is a statewide member-powered organization that works to protect farmland, support farmers, and advance the future of farming in the state. We think that the implementation of LD 1881 presents a really important opportunity to advance balanced solar siting in a way that avoids, minimizes, and/or mitigates the impact of development on our state's most valuable agricultural resources. And prior to LD 1881 becoming law, the Department of Ag Conservation and Forestry really hasn't had a role at all in permitting renewable energy projects on agricultural land. And agricultural land really wasn't included as a natural resource worthy of protecting under environmental law. And we see that as a major gap, and so applaud this legislation and these rules as moving us forward towards more balanced solar siting. And after review of the draft rule language, our conclusion is that DACF has fulfilled the rulemaking responsibilities that the Maine legislature tasked them with in a thorough way, a reasonable way, and in a conscientious way. We do have feedback on specific sections, and I should probably say that we'll also, like others have stated, will provide written comments by the deadline. But this is just some preliminary feedback. So on the definition of high-value agricultural land, we support that major things taken into consideration are contiguous acreage of quality soils, and that those are being defined based on the best available evidence at this point, but also that there's that step of requiring the field-based survey so that the land is truly what it's mapped out as. We heard that a lot during the process, that there was need for that ground truthing, that verification, and are really glad to see that inclusion, that the land must be verified by a licensed soil scientist as being of the highest quality for agricultural production. The specificity of the definition seems to align with the intention of the law as we've interpreted it, that DACF was to interpret which ag land qualifies as high value, explain why in an evidence-based way, and ensure that there's an added layer of regulation for those lands. We also appreciate the really careful consideration that the department has given to PFAS impacted lands. When earlier on in the process, when we provided our stakeholder input, we were sort of thinking if it's PFAS impacted lands, it shouldn't qualify at all as high value agricultural land. But these rules do include PFAS impacted lands as high value, but then don't require a mitigation fee. And given how much is changing in what we know about PFAS, what's possible on PFAS impacted lands, and the fact that each situation is very unique in terms of the level of contamination, the ability to grow food on that land, it makes sense to have some oversight by the department, but no mitigation fee required. So we support where the department has landed in this. Not too much to say on the definition of dual use. It seems pretty satisfactory and aligned with other state definitions of dual use. That ability for there to be flexibility as production needs change is really important, as others have pointed out. What's going to work for in terms of like the marketing of a particular crop may shift over time. And that's why we really like that there's that the management plan is not just agreed to by all parties, which is incredibly important, but is also updated and reviewed annually so that there is that.
Just so you know, we're at 4 minutes.
Oh boy, okay, yeah. So that as things change, it can be updated and there's that flexibility kind of built in. So in terms of the variability compensation amounts, there were 2 pieces of constructive feedback that I just wanted to float now rather than save it for the written comments. One piece is that, so soil designation and active farming history are the most heavily weighted, and that seems appropriate, but we would actually like to see a higher points given to prime agricultural soils that are verified. And, one way to do this could be reducing points elsewhere so that things balance out and there continues to be alignment with the DEP rulemaking. And then on the category 2 conversion pressure, just a bit of explanation in the rules in terms of how those 6 counties were chosen would be helpful. I heard you say in your introduction that it was based on mapping of impervious surfaces, but that would be useful. And also, as conversion pressures change over time, there needs to be a process laid out about how and when this criteria will be updated and which data sources and indicators are going to be monitored so that as conversion pressure changes around the state, we're keeping these up to date rather than being like, these are our 6 counties now and forever, So I think that makes sense. But despite wanting more information, we do agree that high value farmland in locations with a lot of conversion threat and strong access to markets should be evaluated at a higher rate compared to others. So I'll wrap up there, just thanking you for the opportunity to share input and for the thought and care that DACF put into these rules.
Heather Spalding.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Spalding. I'm Deputy Director of Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, MOFGA. Through education, training, and advocacy, we're helping farmers thrive, making more local organic food available, and building sustainable communities. We certify 526 organic operations in the state, And that represents about $120 million in sales. We have about 15,000 dues paying members of the organization. We really appreciate the opportunity to provide oral comments today, and we too will be submitting written comments. Just want to say that keeping agricultural land in production is a priority for MOFGA, and we know it is for DACF, and I think everybody shares that. We appreciate the efforts that the ACF is putting forward to protect Maine's precious and finite agricultural soils. Financial and ecological sustainability are critical for the viability of all Maine farms. We recognize that we need to shift away from wasteful, polluting energy consumption. We need to become much more frugal in our use of energy. And we need to shift away from our reliance on fossil fuels. But at the same time, we recognize that Maine is overly and tenuously reliant on food from away. And we know that we need to produce more food of the food that we consume. So we need more farmers to farm more Maine land. We need to protect the best soils we have from industrial development, including industrial scale solar arrays. We're not categorically opposed to solar arrays, of course, those that can be sited for dual use, but we want to ensure that our agricultural soils are protected for their best and highest use. We recognize that you have to see it when you drive around Maine, that the development of solar arrays has really exploded in recent years, and that is largely because of the subsidies put in place by the legislature. It's clear, we're hearing from our farmers, they're competing for the same land to farm and to have hay and other agricultural resources. They're competing with solar development. And that reduction in the farmland is driving up the value of existing farmland, driving up the property taxes on farmers who are already competing against existing development pressure. We recognize that for many farmers, their wealth is tied up in the value of their land. And in some cases, farmers need access to that income for solar development that may offer as they near retirement. We believe that the mitigation fee approach proposed by the rules balances the opportunity, the potential for income to help farmers or even income to help support ongoing farm businesses. These rules would steer solar development away from the most valuable soils while still allowing access to those soils for development if the developers pay. We feel like the developers are making a lot of profit from these investments, and that's why so many have been built simultaneously and why farmers are being offered such high prices for their land. We do feel that we need to look at how those mitigation costs are being passed on. We really are concerned about grade payers having to bear the brunt of fees. We think that should be on the developers. And we also recognize that there are communities across the state that have been implementing moratoria as they've seen the development spreading and changing the landscape.
We're at 4 minutes.
Just a couple more sentences. The farmers and rural communities need a fair and balanced approach that would help protect the soils. We believe there's a relatively low barrier of 5 acres in the definition of solar development, and that's balanced by the larger 20-acre threshold to trigger a requirement for individual permit. We approve of the NRCS definition of farmland of statewide importance. We do believe that it's appropriate for the use of a soil scientist to review that. And we see a lot of potential in the co-location of solar development and agriculture. We approve the reduction of mitigation fees in light of successful dual use projects. And finally, we appreciate the balance of soils of statewide importance with locally valuable farmland. And we believe that keeping a list of the locally valuable farmland helps to make it a clear and transparent process.
Thank you.
Sure. Morning, everybody. Mark Bertrand from TRC Environmental. We do a lot of environmental permitting for solar and projects here in Maine and the Northeast. Just a couple kind of technical questions. I guess my overall aim this morning is to make sure we add predictability and clarity to the rules for the regulated community, because that's going to help most. The high value ag land definition includes timberland, but that doesn't seem to be covered in statute. So I think that the department may be stretching a little bit there. We do see in the law that there can't be overlapping compensation fees for, say, wetlands and HVALs, but it's not clear which fee goes first. Is it the higher? Is it the first fee that comes in? So additional clarity there between DEP and ag, which one applies there. The concept that locally valuable farmland isn't identified yet adds another complexity to doing development, because when our soil scientists go out, is this an LVF? Is it not? You know, I understand the department's going to be doing some guidance on that, but having guidance separate from rulemaking makes it difficult versus doing, you know, the rulemaking with those changes all at once would be helpful. And then in the permitting flow chart, it looks like, and I know that's not kind of, you know, rule and hard facts, but it seems to indicate that the avoidance and minimization statement has to be submitted to the department before the PBR or individual permit application. And it seems like there's an off ramp there that if the department doesn't like the avoidance and minimization statement, they can say, nope, sorry, you don't have a project. We can't give you a permit. But it seems like the avoidance and minimization statement needs to be part of the application process. Maybe that's the intent. But again, if you could clarify that in the permitting flow chart, because again, what a lot of our clients like to do is pull up, you know, any guidance, any rules, any information on the website before talking to any agencies. So if they get to a point where they just don't know, they may say, you know, it's too unclear. We don't want to talk to agencies yet. So the more you can have clarity and predictability for developers or the regulated community up front would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Next up is Lindsay.
We're going.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to sit at the table. I appreciate this. My name is Lindsay Burgoyne. I serve as the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for Revision Energy. And as you likely know, we've built many multiple solar projects to aid in revenue diversification for farmers and therefore share an interest in the viability of Maine's agricultural economy. Conceptually, we believe mitigation frameworks accompanied by permit by rule processes can function effectively. And in fact, there are such programs here in Maine that we work with, but the details matter. And unfortunately, we feel this draft rule and the permit by rule process within it does need some work. We appreciate the department's inclusion of a permit by rule for projects under 20 acres. However, we do agree with others that it's a bit more onerous than a typical PBR regime, such as the DEP stormwater program, which if you achieve clearly defined and documented best management practices, you receive a permit. So there's transparency and predictability. We have multiple concerns with the proposal as written, but we'll put those in our written comments, just a few comments here today. The surveys and analyses required for the PBR will significantly increase cost. Smaller distributed generation projects like those under 20 acres will have tighter margins. So the addition of such costs will impact whether a project can pencil. And the requirement of a 500-foot buffer on those projects of projects of those size seems unreasonable and could materially add to the acreage, requiring surveys and therefore costs. There's also limited guidance on what soil surveys should include. I think we've heard a little bit about that this morning. And no opportunity for a field finding to overturn NRCS mapping. So we'd love to see more clarity there. And additionally, we are concerned about the department's discretionary approval authority for project design, as there's no transparent criteria outlining bounds for permit denial. Regarding landowner rights, we are really proud of our work with farmers. In the face of a changing climate and the resulting impacts on agricultural viability, we have helped farmers utilize a small portion of their farmlands for solar production, enabling many to diversify revenue and therefore maintain family ownership and long-term viability. From the beginning, our farmers guide us in project development as they know their lands best. We asked the department to consider a PBR option to account for landowners' perspective, especially for projects located on a portion of farmland that allows remaining land to stay in production. That PBR could require impacting less than a maximum percentage of HVAL on the property or provide an opportunity for landowners to attest to the agricultural value of the land as well as personal goals. But regardless of the mechanism, we feel it's critical for landowners to have a voice in the process. Finally, we believe the proposal does lack ripeness and would just ask that prior to implementation, we get some clarity on a few things. Again, we'll cover in our written comments, but definitions and thresholds of PFAS contamination, designation process and extent of locally valuable farmland, guidance on specific standards for field surveys, the section that says additional requirements may be added for dual use, standards to obtain a PBR and standards for permit denial, and guidance on how the rule will be implemented ahead of DEP's final approval to collect compensation. So to wrap up, as we noted in our initial comments, we remind the department of the challenges today in bringing Don, I'll finish my sentence here. Maine has considerable measures in place regarding siting and permitting, including a strong decommissioning law, which requires removal of infrastructure in full and a return of the land at the end of project's lifetime, which does enable land use at the end of project viability. One last point I just want to raise is we would also ask the department to keep mitigation funds within the county of the project. So make sure we're ensuring that money goes back to local support. While we appreciate the inclusion of the PBR, we ask the department for further refinement and another opportunity to provide comments. Thank you. Thanks for the extra 30 seconds.
So Lisa,
St. Hilaire, no, I'm okay.
You don't want to, okay. Nancy?
No, sorry, I was just taking attendance.
I was gonna say, I was confused. Francesca? Maine Audubon?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Francesca Gundrum, and I'm the Director of Advocacy for Maine Audubon, which is the state's oldest and largest wildlife conservation organization. And on behalf of our 30,000 members, supporters, and volunteers, appreciate the opportunity to provide brief and high-level oral testimony today on the Chapter 575 rulemaking before us. We will be providing joint written comments with our partners at the Nature Conservancy with more detail on some of the topics that I'll breeze through today. Firstly, I'll say that one of the leading threats right behind habitat loss to wildlife is climate change. And Maine Audubon is a strong supporter of renewable energy development. And we know that the rapid deployment of new renewable energy resources is critical to reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. So we think today that these rules represent a solid start. There's a lot of really great content within the DACF rules put forward here. But we need to continue to strike that balance between making sure that we are able to thoughtfully and rapidly deploy renewable energy technologies, and also protecting our natural resources, and in the case before us today, our agricultural resources. So that's the lens by which we are approaching our review. We've been here since the very start. It's been almost 2 years or so now since this idea became bill, law, rules before us. And we have given our expertise on ecology, conservation side, have been quite focused on the DEP side of the rulemaking. But of course, as we all know, how everything intermingles from agency to agency is critical to making sure that this program operates effectively and in ways that, again, we balance the needs of getting those renewable energy technologies deployed and thoughtfully protecting our resources. So that's why we're here today on the DACF side. And like I said, we believe we're on the right track, but with input from Maine Audubon and other stakeholders in the room here, we think we can get closer to that balance. So we look forward to providing comments on some of our questions related to dual use, some of which have been brought up here today. Some clarity and definitions and timeline. Again, making sure that we're offering that predictability and flexibility to developers. But doing right by, again, the now law before us and making sure we're fulfilling, what the legislature's told us to do here. Some questions about the PBR process and refining that. There's some, as folks have mentioned, some unique components to the PBR within these rules that is a little atypical. So we just want to take a closer look and we'll offer comments on that. And then big picture, we are reviewing both the DEP and DACF rules here with the lens to make sure that we are not unintentionally creating really extreme competition between our agricultural resources and our natural resources. And that is going to inherently happen once we put numbers to resources, but making sure that how they all line up isn't putting so much pressure on our natural resources versus ag. And then I'm gonna get dinged. Okay, thank you. I'll just say in closing here that we'd be remiss if I didn't share something that's on the minds of everyone at Maine Audubon, in that there are so many pressures, development pressures on our resources, agricultural and natural, and housing comes to mind too. And so we look forward to any opportunity to think about ways in which we can address the holistic, big picture scope of this issue, pressure on our resources across the state, and making sure that we are not just focusing solely on our renewable energy development, which we need to address our goals. So I'll close there and just say thank you to DACF staff for this start. We're definitely headed on the right track, and we look forward to submitting written comments and to any kind of collaboration we can work on here forward. So thank you for your time.
Bill,
Fluker, yeah,
thank you.
thank you. I'm the state representative from House District 44, which represents Hope, Warren, and Union. I'm also the chair of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee. Just want to start off by saying thank you so much to DECF for all of your continuing hard work on this issue. I think you've really taken on a super challenging topic and come up with something that, from my perspective, looks really fair and balanced, and I appreciate. I think there's flexibility in the rules, which are necessary in order to keep farms moving forward, both by protecting their land and by creating opportunity for financial viability for them. I think necessarily that flexible balance is hard to strike when you're drafting these things. And I think we're all reflecting that here today. I would love to just reflect that, like, I think the core of this idea is farm viability, right? And so making sure that we have the land going forward to take care of our industry, and so that we have the processing that we need for dairy to keep it afloat. So we have the supply for the processors, which means goes all the way back to having the land. But then I think also when we look at the 5-acre and the 20-acre PBR, want to make sure that those are workable for farmers as well, so that they have additional sources of income to stay in business. I don't want to be in competition with wildlife resources at all, but I do, and I'm so proud of the fact that we are saying that our agricultural land is significant. It is important to the value of the state. It's part of our history. It's part of our continuing cultural resources, and we don't want to lose it. And so once again, just going back to the idea that striking this balance of caring for our communities by making sure that there's electricity and energy being produced for them that's affordable for all, but also making sure that we're still growing the milk and the beef and the carrots that we all want to be able to have at our farmers markets. I've before I was a legislator, I didn't raise them, but I educated dozens of apprentices who are still farming in the state of Maine, and they give me calls and say, I don't have access to the hay that I need to feed my beef. I'm getting wonderful, value for my beef. The prices are great. I can make this work. I just need to feed them. And they're in leads. They're competing with big solar projects going in. We know about Warren, and I live in Warren. The 660-acre project going to Warren is, very controversial for our community. It's hard for a lot of folks to swallow. And big signs, not signs, but big meetings happening. Where people don't want it to go in. People are worried about what happens at this point. So I think that's a little bit of what the solar industry is facing here, is people are seeing the panels go up and they're seeing the nature of their homes change and they are made uncomfortable by it, right? And so finding that balance so that farms stay in business, the land stays open, stays in production, but also finding the energy we need is at the core of what we're doing. So just to sum up, looking at that PBR, making sure we have farm viability and opportunity for solar development to continue in the right ways, smart growth and development. Thank you.
Yeah. Caitlin Nuzzo?
Morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the draft rules. My name is Caitlin Nuzzo. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Nature Conservancy here in Maine. We're a nonprofit conservation organization dedicated to conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. Guided by science, we create innovative, on-the-ground solutions to our world's toughest challenges so that nature and people can thrive together. We use a collaborative approach that engages local communities, governments, the private sector, and other partners. I think this issue is a really great example of sort of how we approach our work and how we try to do what I just outlined. We were involved in initial stakeholder conversations that led to LD 1881. We helped draft and pass the bill in the legislature, and those initial stakeholder conversations were really important. They included representatives from the industry, representatives from state agencies, NGO partners. I think they were really important and really good conversations, ultimately, which led to a draft of a bill that went through the legislative process. It came out of committee with a really great vote. It passed under the hammer in both bodies of the legislature. So I just think that that context is important here. This law was built with a lot of really great support, and I think the legislature was directing us to think really carefully about this piece. PNC also submitted initial feedback on the rules when DACF opened that process. Thank you for that opportunity at that point. I want to be really clear. Our organization fully supports the rapid deployment of renewable energy, and we believe that careful siting that fully considers climate, conservation, and community impacts will deliver the best outcomes for our state. We did some polling in March of 2023 as we were working on this bill that showed that 70% of Mainers support policy requiring renewable energy developers to pay a fee to compensate for those impacts to highly valued lands and using that revenue to conserve, restore, or protect lands in Maine. The Nature Conservancy works with the state agencies to oversee the MNRCP program, which is the wetland mitigation program. And we sort of use that experience and thinking through that process that program has been in place for a long time to think through both the DEP side and the ag side of this process. We'll be submitting technical written comments as Chess noted with Maine Audubon. We've worked really closely with them throughout this process. At a really high level, I think we appreciate, first off, that the draft rules rely on many existing statutory definitions. I think that's a good start. Creating new definitions in rulemaking is never a good case for efficiency. So we think that was really good. We think that the team that drafted these rules, I've never seen such a clear memo. I think the memo that accompanied the rules was really helpful. And the two goals that are outlined in the memo, I think were accomplished, using the standards that are objective as science currently allows, and then addressing the importance of other factors, including development pressure and current use. A lot's been said about soil mapping, soil data. That was something that was discussed repeatedly throughout the stakeholder group in the legislature and committee process. We think that having the soil surveys is a really great balance. I think that's what developers had asked for at that point in the process. So having the ground truthing is important. It's part of the MNRCP process as well. Somebody goes out and ground truths. There might be a wetland on a map, but somebody goes out and actually ground truths that. I think that parallel makes a lot of good sense. Again, a lot has already been covered. I think we'll submit really some more details in written comments, but I just wanted to offer a little bit of context in how we've been approaching this. So thank you for the opportunity to comment and we'll submit the written details.
Yeah. Is it Chad? I can't read this. Or Chuck? Sorry, Chuck? The dairy farm? I think he might have left.
A gentleman just stepped out.
Pat, Maine Forest,
That's true.
Stroud, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on these draft rules. My name's Patrick Strauch. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Forest Products Council. We're a advocacy organization looking out after the interests of landowners, mills and manufacturers and loggers and truckers. And I'd like to explain my standing on this issue. We're concerned about forest regulations in all parts of the state as it relates to small and large landowner policy, wood supply, and opportunities to diverse landowner income that ultimately ensure long-term forest management investments. We're like the farmers in that we see the opportunities for solar farms, wind farms, conservation easements. These are all mechanisms that create stability for the landowner community. So especially in times like this right now when markets are depressed, we can maintain ownership of land. So why am I here talking about prime ag land? When I look at the rule, I am not clear as to where the limits are when we're talking about prime ag land. When I read it, the rule extends into forest land without limitations. As written, any parcel of land with high value soils now becomes regulated and part of this effort. And we think part of this is in the staff write-up, which was very good, but it really made me understand where the philosophy of this was going. The staff write-up says, quote, "The proposed rule does not restrict the definition of HVAL to already cleared lands or operating farms because important soils will be critical to the expansion of agriculture in Maine to feed a growing population and help Maine become more food independent. Prime soils that are currently forested are still valuable for agricultural activities now and in the future, and are therefore included in the current definition of high value agricultural land." Now, I know there's some distinctions in that they get maybe a lower rating in the tier, but the policy itself is much more expansive than I think the ACF committee talked about. That means any forest land, as it's written now, doesn't have to have a farm connected to it, doesn't have to have a field connected to it, is going to be subject to this kind of policy. And I think that's a much bigger discussion than we had in the ACF committee on this issue. So if it's a trial balloon, I'm trying to strongly suggest we not go there. This is a big policy decision. Now, the Ag Committee really gave you license to determine what high value agriculture is in adopting these rules. So this is a great chance to try and set the direction straight in terms of where we go with this. I got more time?
If you'd like to wrap up.
Oh, okay. So you can see where my concern is. We think these solar projects are important, but in a state where you have a lot of privately owned land, we need to rethink these kinds of policies. It would be better to be thinking about where can we encourage these kinds of developments to occur and put more effort into that. We have a history of that with expedited wind zones. And I think this, along with Chapter 375, are creating quite a bit of policy discussion from the forest land community. So I'd encourage you to rethink where we're going with this land section and the agricultural policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to the online commenters. I believe the first person online is Kate Daniel, Coalition for Community Solar Access.
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide some input today into this rulemaking. Again, my name is Kate Daniel. I am the Northeast Regional Director for Coalition for Community Solar Access, or CCSA. We are a coalition of businesses and nonprofits working to expand customer choice and equitable access to local clean energy for all American households and businesses. In setting the context for our comments, and we've heard this today in other forms, but we'd like to be very clear that solar is indeed compatible with agriculture. We appreciate the need to identify and preserve the most valuable farmland for food production. However, we must be honest about the actual impact of solar on farmland loss. As we've heard already, we need better data on this issue, but some simple back of the envelope analysis could still be helpful here. There are currently approximately 900 megawatts of commercial, community, and utility scale solar in Maine, which equates to approximately 4,500 acres of land. The latest U.S. Census of Agriculture shows that there is still over 1.2 million acres of farmland in Maine. And of the total of over 82,000 acres that Maine has lost since 2017 of farmland, solar is less than 5% of that. So we must acknowledge that not only is solar not the main driver of concerns around agricultural land, but also, as many of the commenters before me have noted, that solar can actually protect and enhance agricultural communities by diversifying revenues, allowing farmers to hold on to their land. And really, it's important to trust farmers and landowners to do what is best for their livelihoods. We will provide written comments, and I appreciate all that's been said today. So I have just a few additional brief areas to note. We appreciate many areas of the rulemaking and ways in which DACF has been responsive to comments filed earlier. We still do have a few significant concerns, and those primary concerns are around the mismatch in some of the timing of the rulemaking development, particularly with the DEP Chapter 375 process that we've heard today, as well as the several areas of undefined or undeveloped areas of rulemaking here that still leave a significant amount of uncertainty to how these rules will actually impact both solar development and farmland. We have some concerns around the definition of the high value agricultural land, and that the scope of what's included there is overly expansive as compared to what the original intent was, and as well as the potential for compensation fees to be overly high and burdensome, even on lands that are still farmed with solar on them or are not likely to be farmed in the future anyway. We do support several areas in the draft rules, and I want to thank DACF for these areas, particularly how the start of construction is defined in order to make sure that we are protecting the agreements that landowners and farmers have put in place with their business partners. We appreciate the permit by rule process with some notes that I share the concerns of revision and MREA before me on some of the specifics around the permitting process there. And similarly, we appreciate the differential treatment of PFAS impacted land and requiring that, or not requiring projects on land with PFAS to pay compensation, though there are some additional details to develop on that piece of things. So again, we will provide further details in our comments, and we greatly appreciate the process here and your time today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And Dale Knapp.
Oops. I'm not sure if my cameras work correctly. I think my laptop's wonky, but thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you here today. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person. I had planned to, but something popped up. So real quickly, I was actually very active when this was in legislative committee in May of 2023. Initially, the rule contained the language that identified prime farmland and soils of statewide importance as being the resources to be regulated in this law. Ultimately, after some testimony and some back and forth, I think the committee and the legislature wisely removed that language from the bill and directed DACF to develop a unique definition for high value agricultural land. Prime and soils of statewide importance is an NRCS definition. These are truly soil potential ratings. And, that definition and data is not suitable for, use in regulatory purposes or for permitting. And they make that abundantly clear. So I think that, the proposed rule goes right back to that to some degree in defiance of what the legislature directed the department to do. Now, I recognize that, part of this is, the soil physical and chemical characteristics that make a soil potentially suitable for use as agriculture. I think when I think about high value agricultural land, there's another factor to it. And I think that the department needs to do more work there. Potentially it is that it produces a crop yield. It is a part of a working farm. I think this needs to be narrowed down and specified a little bit better, I think, as directed by the legislature. And looking at these rules, some of the things that I struggle with, I think about, the conversion of forest to field. And, ultimately, in some of these instances, if you have an area that's identified as prime farmland, there may be a limiting factor that's present, such as, I think it was mentioned earlier, stony ground, or just being covered by forest, period, makes it costly to transition that site into active use as agriculture. So let's say, hypothetically, we install a solar facility and we remove the rocks, we level the site, we remove the forest land, we establish meadow cover under those panels. Most of these projects have a long-term lease, but that lease has a lifespan. So eventually that lease terminates and the use of that land reverts to the underlying landowner. So I think I heard it mentioned earlier, kind of this highest and best use principle. If in 30 years, when that site is decommissioned as fully funded prior to breaking ground, if then the highest and best use for that land is agriculture, it will be the most suitable site for agriculture, post operation. The rocks will be cleared, the trees will be gone, it'll be, ready to produce whatever crop you choose. And so I think some of the rules, even in instances where you take a forested condition, convert it to a solar field, and you meet the qualification for dual use agriculture, you're still paying a fee. So, you're converting forest into a solar farm that is also an agriculture operation. And, there's a cost tied to that. So it seems to me like there are components of this rule that, are kind of penalizing developers for doing what ultimately would be beneficial for agriculture. I will provide more detailed written comments. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. Appreciate it. Sorry for running over.
Okay. Is there anyone else online who wanted to provide public comment? Was there anyone else in the room that didn't get a chance to sign up that wanted to provide public comment? Well, thank you everyone again. Really appreciate you taking the time to come out here. We've got this meeting recorded so I can type down what was said, and I took notes during as well. But if you want to submit your notes, you can email us at agenergy@maine.gov. You can give us a printed copy. You can drop it by our office or mail it to us, whatever is most convenient for you. It just has to be done by the end of August 29th.